Kia ora everyone, welcome back, and it's the next in our series of crafting on a budget. Now, in previous videos we've looked at making our own gesso and comparing that with some bought ones, and also making our own texture paste. In today's video I want to move on and look at three different texture finishes that we can also create, and we're going to be sticking with our same basic core ingredients. So we're going to be using PVA, we're going to be using talcum powder or plaster of Paris, and we're going to be using acrylic paint. And from those same ingredients that we've used in previous videos, today we're going to be looking at how to make a 3D outliner paint, how to make a crackle glazed finish or paint effect, and also we're going to be looking at chalk paint. That was the other thing. I knew there were three things. We're going to be looking at some chalk paint as well. So without further ado, let's get cracking. Let's look at some recipes and let's see how we can use these things in our art journals. Okay, so I'm going to start today with chalk paint, and I will put all the recipes in the description box below. And I'm going to be working in my no-cost journal that I made in the first episode in this series. So let's flick over to a page we haven't used. There we go. Now, chalk paint. You can buy chalk paint, but why would you? It's dead easy to make, and you're likely to already have the ingredients if you've made any of the things we've talked about previously in this series. Now, you can make this with plaster of Paris, or you can use talcum powder, depending on what you've got. I've done both. Personally, I prefer the results I get with the plaster of Paris, but that's, as I say, that's purely a personal preference. I just find you get a little bit more it's a little bit more gritty, and for me that's kind of what chalk paint is about. So whatever you're using, whether you're using powder or whether you're using plaster of Paris, you want 1 part of that to 2 parts of paint. So I'm using a tablespoon measure here, so I'm going to grab 2 parts, 2 tablespoons of my paint. And again, this is just a cheap student grade acrylic paint. It's nothing fancy. Alright, so there's my 2 parts paint. We're going to mix those up. And I love the finish chalk paint gives you. I first came across it when I was doing a lot of upcycling of furniture. And one of the things you can do with chalk paint is to paint a base colour onto whatever you're using, particularly if you're working on wood actually, and then put your chalk paint over the top and just gently rub it back, and you get that really lovely the base colour coming through, sort of that distressed look. And you can do that in your journals as well. Today I'm just going to show you what it looks like painted on a page, because it's great as a base if you're working in your art journal. And there you go, I've got a lovely turquoise colour there. Now I'm hoping if I hold that up you'll be able to see that's got quite a good texture to it. And as I say, it will make a lovely base for a page in an art journal. Alright, it is as simple as that. Now, depending on what you want to do with this, and depending on your personal preference, because obviously that's quite thick, that's, you know, acrylic paint with plaster of Paris, so it's going to be quite thick. Depending what you're doing with it, you can add a little spritz of water, and I would suggesting use a spritz, use a spray bottle, just so that you don't add too much at once. You can always add more, but you can't take out. So you can thin this down to whatever consistency you want. And as I say, it really depends what you're using it for. Now I'm going to be using this to paint a background for a page in my journal. So I'm going to add just a touch more water there. And you know what? Chalk paint is as simple as that. Let's see how it goes on our page. Okay, so hopefully you can see there, that's got really good coverage already, and it's a lovely opaque base to start working in our journal. All right, we'll put that to dry. We'll come back and have another look at it once it's dry and see the sort of the end result. But you know, it's got a lovely texture to it. Not too much, not as much as if we'd used textured paste, but it's got that lovely little bit of texture to it, and that sort of chalky, opaque look. Right, we'll pop that to dry. Let's move on to the second thing we're going to look at today is outliner paint. Now, you can use this in a variety of ways, and you will see on this sample test piece I did here, I used this freestyle just to create an interesting pattern, and this could become a background or a collage piece or anything you know, that you like, really. But it's got this lovely sort of 3D texture. Can you see that there? So that's just a freestyle piece. The other thing you can do is you will see here on my page in my journal, and this is just painted with acrylic paint, but what I've done is used a stencil, and I've drawn, and this is just drawn with a little white charcoal, but you could also use a pencil. I've drawn a little flower here which is going to form a border down my page, and you can use a stencil to trace where you want to use the outliner paint, and you can make shapes in that way. So let's see how this is made. Again, we're just using our same ingredients that we've been using before, and this time we're going to be using our talcum powder and PVA glue. Now I don't have specific quantities for this, but what I can say is that you want to have a consistency similar to toothpaste, so quite thick. So we've got some baby powder in there, and it doesn't have to be baby powder, it could be any kind of talcum powder, and I'm adding a little bit of PVA glue. We're going to give it a mix. Now obviously this is going to come out to be sort of an off-white colour, and the chances are you're going to want this to be coloured. So the other thing that we add in is a little bit of acrylic paint or food colouring. Now I'm not someone who uses a lot of food colouring, so I have to be honest and say I haven't tried it. but apparently you can. So I'm going to add in a little bit of this lovely limey, that's called yellow green, and again just a student grade paint. Whoop. And we're going to mix, and as you can see that is really quite a thick consistency. Now you do want it to be nice and smooth. And you can see, didn't need a lot of paint. And that is the kind of consistency you want. Alright, so the next trick, let's put the lid on our PVA, make a bit of space, and the powder, I don't want that everywhere. Right, next piece of equipment that you're going to need today is a little plastic bag, and this might be something that you've upcycled off some packaging. It might be something like this. This is a Ziploc bag. As you can see, it's been used before, but it's had a good wash. Alright, you're going to take the bottom corner and you're going to snip just the tiniest, can you see that? Just the tiniest tiny corner off there. And again, you can always make it a little bit bigger, you can't make it smaller. So kind of be cautious. And you're going to tip that paste, because it is more of a paste than a paint, this one. And tip that paste into your poly bag. Now, I'm not making huge quantities of anything today, and part of the reason is that it's summer here in New Zealand, and where I live today it's round about 36 degrees. So I am not making big quantities of anything because it's going to dry up. Alright, so push all that paint and paste down to the corner of your bag, and you can see there's my hole, and you literally, it's like icing a cake. So if you've done any cake decorating, you're going to be fine. And so you just, now for this one I'm going to follow the lines that I've drawn using my stencil. And you just keep a nice smooth even sort of texture. It just take a little bit of playing with, because obviously the rate that you squeeze and the rate that you move your hand will depend on how much of your paste comes out. But you can play with this and experiment. You can get thicker and thinner lines. There we are. I think I'm just going to join that one up a little bit more. There we go. This is one of those things, like anything, it takes a little bit of practice. So as I say, that was one where I'd gone over some lines that I'd done with a stencil. And I'm going to freehand now and just put a couple of leaves in as well. And you can fill shapes in, or you can do random dots. So for example, if I wanted to add a bit of decoration on the bottom of my page here. There we go. Might carry that on. Oop. Now, what you can do, you see that one just sort of blobbed a bit. Do it while it's wet. There you go. You can kind of sort out some of the bits that don't quite go according to plan. And as long as it's still wet, you can add in and the paste will sort of merge together. Once it's dry, that isn't so successful. But you know, have a play, see what you like, but it adds another dimension to your work. Now, as I said when we were making this, if you want to just make it with the powder and the PVA glue, you'll get a kind of off-white. And if you do that, you can then paint over it with acrylic paint. So again, it's a bit like the texture paste. You can colour it first, you can colour it afterwards, entirely up to you and depending what you want to do. Okay, again, we're going to leave that to dry. We'll come back and have a look at the end of the video once it's dry. And we'll move on to the last thing we're going to look at today, which is how to create that crackle glaze effect. All right, this is what I mean by the crackle glaze effect. And this is, you can buy special, a special medium which makes your paint crackle like this. But by very simply layering paint, acrylic paint and PVA glue, you can achieve exactly the same effect. Now this is one I've done on a wooden base. So that's that one. And here's the one I showed you previously in my little sample book here. So again, it makes a lovely background to use for your journal pages, or again, you know, anything that you're making like this. This is a wooden base that came with 2 pre-drilled holes, and I tend to turn these into wall plaques, and that makes a nice background for whatever sort of mixed media or collage I want to put on there. All right. So the only thing we need for this is we need 2 different colours of acrylic paint and we need a PVA glue. So let's see how it's done. The page in my journal that we've just been using is still drying, so I'm going to show you this. This is just a lightweight piece of cardstock, and I'm going to show you how this works on that. Alright, so I've got two colours of paint. I've got a burnt umber and a raw sienna. Now I'm going to take the burnt umber first, and I'm literally just going to paint a coat of this onto my cardstock. Okay, going to pop that to dry, and that is going to be the base colour that you see here. So for example, in this one it was the dark blue. Right, alright, so as you'll see, that's now dry, and I haven't been too worried about getting a completely even coverage on this layer, because this is going to be underneath and it is just going to be showing through in places. The other thing is the card that I happen to have been using is sort of within the same colour range as the paints and everything I'm using, so it doesn't really matter if a little bit of that colour shows through. If you've got a completely different colour background, then you may want to ensure that there is a more even coverage, but for our purposes today this is sufficient. Alright, base coat of acrylic paint down, and now you're going to take your PVA glue and put a coat of that over the top. Now this needs to be a reasonably, not thick, but it needs to be a reasonably good layer, and you want to make sure it is completely covered. There we go. Now whilst that's, you do want this to dry, you don't want it to dry completely, and the best way I can describe it is that it almost needs to dry so that you have a skin on it. So you can see there that that's quite, it is quite thick in places, but you need to have a skin, and the skin needs to be sufficient so that you can paint over the top of it without your paint mixing with the PVA glue. That might sound complex, but once you've done it a couple of times you'll get the feel for the dryness that this needs to be. So we're going to leave that for a few moments and we'll come back and have a look. So this is now at that stage where I call it's got a skin on it, so I can touch it without it, it's still slightly tacky, but it's not completely dry. What we're going to do now is add our top coat. Now this is my raw sienna. I think I'm going to add a little bit of this. I'm also going to mix in a slightly lighter colour, and this one's just described as tan. There we go. And again, I'm just going to paint that across the top. And then I'm just going to leave that to dry. Now what should happen as it dries, the paint will crackle, that top layer of paint will crack because of the PVA glue underneath it. And you can already just start to see some of it happening here and here and here And as I say, as that dries, that you get more and more of the crackle effect. Now the other thing to say is that you will notice as I was putting the paint on, before I left it, I made sure my brush strokes were all going the same way. And I've just found that gives me a slightly better effect. Alright, so you can see as this is drying already, as I say, it's a hot day here, so as it's drying quite quickly, that's all starting to crackle up already. So we'll pop this to the side, we'll let this dry completely, we'll come back and we'll review all
just
of what
before
we've done
we check
today.
out our
The paint finishes that we've done today, I wanted to talk just a little bit about storing the things you make. So as you will see, I quite often use jam jars. This is my texture paste, and I would also store gesso in the same way, making sure they're really firmly done up. In here you will see I've put the rest of that chalk paint, because the chances are, even if you make small quantities, you're going to be not necessarily using the whole thing up. And you know, one of those things about crafting on a budget is not wasting things. So put them in an airtight container, seal them up nicely, and they should last for quite a while. And as I said in my previous videos, I happen to know that the texture paste I make will last around 3 months. And the chalk paint, I haven't tried keeping it for that long, but I'm pretty sure it will last a couple of weeks like this. As I've said before, it does depend on the climate that you're in, but do try and keep the air out of things, and you've got a good chance of them lasting until you need them next. Now with the outliner paint, one of the things you can do if you've got it in a Ziploc bag is to seal that Ziploc up properly and use a scraper or an old credit card or store card and just squish all that paint or paste down into the corner. And you will see the other thing I've done is I've stuck a bit of masking tape over the corner that I'd cut, just so that it doesn't all squidge out. And again, you're sealing all that air out. Now with this paste, if you keep it all down there, look, you're going to have less chance of that drying out, because this does dry up quite quickly. I'll show you, this is the pot that I had it in. I mixed it in and you'll see that this is dried up already, or nearly. So keep that down like that. You can roll your bag up. There we go. And you could even pop that into a plastic bottle with a lid to store. Alright, so there we go. Little thinking about storage and not wasting things as well. Let's recap and see how things have dried up and what we've achieved. The first thing we looked at was chalk paint, and that was literally Plaster of Paris mixed with acrylic paint. And you can see it's dried up, it's got that lovely opaque chalky texture, and that's a great basis for starting to work on. And then on our other page here, we've got our 3D outliner paint. You can see again that's completely dry. We've got that lovely texture, and it's got almost it's got quite an odd feel actually. It's almost a rubbery feel to it, but some great 3D textural work. And then the last thing we did today was to make a crackle glaze. Now this is still just fractionally wet, so I do expect it to crackle just a little bit more. But as I say, it's very warm here today, and I think that the PVA glue could have been just a little bit wetter in places when I put this on. But there we go, there's our crackle glaze effect. This one that I showed you earlier has come up a little bit better, and I suspect that it was a cooler day when I did that, and it is just about playing with it. It's about experimenting and just catching that layer of PVA at the right level of dryness. But you can see how that works. I'm going to pop that back in the sun to finish drying, and some of that will crackle up a little bit more, I expect. Alright, so there we go, guys. We've looked at 3 different paint effects today that we can get to start using in our journals or on other craft projects. Again, sticking with our same basic ingredients. In my next video, we're going to be looking at tools and some handy hacks for making things with items that you will find around your home. So keep watching, folks, but for now, thank you for your support. Ka kite anō.